Good afternoon, Blues, and welcome to the Royal Blue podcast. My name is Ian Kroll, and I am joined by Chris Beasley. We are streaming live on the Echoes Everton Facebook page and the Royal Blue YouTube channel. As I've said, I'm joined by the Echoes Everton FC reporter, Chris Beasley. Chris, how are you doing? So much for a quiet weekend of Everton news.
Yeah, I mean, we were thinking maybe have a fortnight we could actually bask in an away victory at Crystal Palace, but no such luck. You know, the Blues have been climbing the table, and we're actually just a couple of points off, I think, placing the top half when we finished, and suddenly they find themselves a joint bottom now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I spoke to the Echoes Everton FC correspondent yesterday, Joe Thomas, on the Friday pod, and there's been for the past couple of weeks, there's been a lot of positivity around the place, and that's mainly down to Sean Dyche getting the results that Everton have thoroughly deserved and maybe not have got early on in the season. Has that been kind of washed away a little bit now, or should we still feel that air of positivity?
Well, I think that the big thing for me is that first of all, I believe that Everton will still stay up, and that would be very different than if this had happened last season or perhaps the year before. And there's a couple of reasons for that, both in terms of what Everton are doing and what the other teams in the Premier League are doing. Sort of been a feeling in recent times that the way things are going, that the verdict was going to go against Everton, but in terms of whether it was going to be sporting sanctions, which the club feel are wholly inappropriate for what is an economic matter, something that's happened within the club's accounts, and to go into the wherewithals and the detail overall. That's a very good piece by Joe this morning, which actually goes into that side of things, because there's a lot of passion over this, quite rightly so. But if we're brutally honest, a lot of people, including myself, only totally had a sort of a grasp of, reading the report yesterday. Might not know the total ins and outs of what's going on. I've been briefed for a long time on this situation, but still a very complicated matter, as it actually says in the report itself. But yeah, I think they will bring out a spirit of defiance amongst Evertonians, because yes, they're down on 4 points now, and only one team has stayed up from that position after a dozen games, and that was Everton, of course, in 94-95, went on to win the FA Cup under Joe Royle. I think one big positive to come out of this for Everton is that there does seem to be a lack of strength in terms of quality at the bottom of the division this season compared to, like I said, it happened last year or the year before. And there's going to be a feeling they're only a couple of points off Luton Town, and safety, only 1 point adrift of Sheffield United. Surely over 20, what are we on now? 26 more games to go. You'd back Everton to overhaul those teams, and because, like we said, they were on the cusp of mid-table before this happened, and seems to be a much more improving Everton team than what we've seen in recent years.
I mean, this is just absolutely unprecedented. This this breaking news story that happened yesterday. The only comparison that we can put towards it is when something similar happened to Portsmouth for different reasons, but they got a 9-point deduction. So we were briefed yesterday, before, because it was embargoed, just before the 12 o'clock embargo. We knew the decision was coming soon. What was your initial reaction when you first heard it? Like, just initial shock, unbelievable. I
was staggered, given that, as you say, in 135 years of English top flight football, the biggest points deduction until that point had been Portsmouth in 2010, getting 9 points for entering administration within the season. And the piece I've done now just gone out there about how the Premier League can awaken a spirit of the Blues that used to give Alex Ferguson a nightmare. So you can check out that piece to get my thoughts on the subject in depth. But I talk about that there. these previous points deductions, they were always tangible. You could always see what had happened. Portsmouth, we might not know the ins and outs of what an administration was, but you grasp the concept of it. And then there's other times when Middlesbrough have been deducted 3 points for failing to fulfil a fixture. I think Arsenal and Manchester United got deducted 2 points and 1 point respectively for a mass brawl at Old Trafford in 1990, and 100 years before that, Sunderland got a couple of points taken off them for fielding an ineligible player. So they're all things that you can look at and say, yeah, that's something that's happened there, and I can see why a penalty has been enforced. With Everton, such a complicated matter and a financial technicality. I think Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, who's a lifelong Evertonian, he'd spoken about it, at a time when there's a war going on in Ukraine, which had affected it, and the worldwide pandemic. The fact that Everton are trying to build a new stadium, which is going to be used as one of the showcase venues at the European Championships, which the FA will be delighted to use it in that respect. That Everton are being penalised so severely, like we say, record-breaking a number of points for something that's just the idea that whatever you think has gone on, that the punishment just doesn't seem to fit the crime, and it seems to be a massive amount of points. And what it also does is obviously opens up the whole hornet's nest to what could go on with Manchester City and other clubs, given that they've got something like 115 charges against them.
Well, we'll definitely come on to that. Obviously, we can't really go into detail on those clubs because it's not for us to say. And although there are 115 alleged breaches, they are being investigated. So the next thing I'll come on to is obviously what you've just kind of mentioned is the aggregating factors. Before I do so, but if you're listening and you're watching on our YouTube channel and our Facebook page, leave us a comment, leave us a question, and I'll put it to Chris, and I'll read it out, and I'll see if Chris can answer any of your questions. But aggregating factors, then, Chris, you've kind of just gone into it a little bit there. I'm just going to kind of read it off. Some of my notes here. So the main bone of contention from Everton's point of view, well, from the Premier League's point of view, where the kind of button heads a little bit, is these are just to name a few, like the likes of the war in Ukraine, COVID, transfer market valuation of players, within this period. Why are the Premier League biting back so hard on this? Because quite clearly these factors have played a role, in Everton's financial records over the past 3 to 4 years. Yeah,
it's strange. So it just seems like they're trying to make an example of them. It's weird because Everton have always maintained that they have been thoroughly transparent throughout the process, have been respectful of the process, and played their part and fronting up when there's been an issue for a time that they were working alongside, obviously, the Premier League when it came to their own transfers. Everybody knows that there's been a period where Everton's spend had been reckless. Farhad Moshiri admitted that himself, and he said, was it the summer in 2022, we've not always spent large amounts of money wisely, but that period had already finished. We're talking about the 21-22 for the period which was under investigation, and Everton's spending had been curbed right back then. I think they even made a profit at trading that year. So Everton had done their part, and yet the Premier League is still accusing them of being reckless in this respect. It's all very strange, and I suppose in terms of Everton are obviously appealing this, and these factors may be reassessed by whoever ends up covering that appeal, because Everton have always felt that they've been assisting the Premier League in this whole process, but there seems to be some sort of breakdown in communication somewhere along the line where that dynamic has shifted, where the cooperation and feeling of goodwill between both parties has eroded. And like you say, that these are all real factors. I mean, Everton talk about the stadium naming rights. That's £200 million of potential revenue they missed out with there, and that was obviously going to come from Mr. Usmanov's company USM, and that obviously had to be pulled the plug on that after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The fact that they're building a new stadium in a pandemic, they carried on despite all of that. Yeah, it's all mentioned in there. But I mean, it does seem strange that this feeling of cooperation did disappear, and they ended up sort of being so hostile towards the club.
I mean, another point in the report is the line on Everton having benefited from this within a sporting context or sporting arena or whatever way you want to look at it, but the punishment doesn't fit that bullet point or statement within the actual statement. So it's not like they've obviously been punished with a fine. It is obviously, we know it's the 10-point deduction. How is that fair? How is that relevant? How is it fair to the fans who quite clearly are being punished here?
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, it says amongst all of that because Everton have got a billionaire owner in Farhad Moshiri, who's obviously now agreed to sell his entire stake in the club to 777 Partners, that a financial penalty wouldn't be worth anything to Everton, because he's got deep pockets and he can just pay whatever. But yeah, like you say, that's been the whole crux of the matter for Everton, is they don't think that a sporting penalty, like you say, something that affects the fans, and we all know how much beleaguered Blues have been through these past couple of years. It's them and the players who are hurting this morning. It's them who's, and also the staff of the club. It's their livelihoods. I say that I'm confident that Everton will stay up, but they've been put in this precarious position now. And if at any point Everton were to be relegated from the Premier League, the most comparable example you could use was when Aston Villa went down in 2016, and I think 500 people lost their jobs then. So yeah, these are the people who are going to be affected by this decision. We've just got to hope, like I say, that Everton do it on the pitch. But yeah, we were talking about that period. Like we say, it's not like they were investing the funds into the team, because there's been this issue in terms of other clubs who've been affected by this. Burnley got relegated and they came back up. They're the only ones, I guess, who could have any sort of real grievance. Obviously, ironically, they were under Sean Dyche at the time that season till he got sacked on Good Friday.
Well, there was talk of Leicester yesterday making a stance as well.
Yeah, I mean, if Leicester are doing something, well, Leicester went down last season, and it's not last season that they were investigating. So I don't understand personally how all that works, because it's to do with 21-22. And if these 10 points had been deducted that season, of course, Everton are appealing anyway. But even a worst case scenario, Everton got deducted 10 points in 21-22. It's only Burnley whose position would be changed by that, because I mean, they would have stayed up and Everton would have gone down. As to what happens last season with like Leeds United and Leicester, as far as I can see, it's not applicable. And like I said, it's not even like, obviously Manchester City could be cleared of all 115 charges potentially, but over that period, they've gone on to have unprecedented success. They've won more trophies in that period than they did over the previous 100 years. And had the worst ever season when we were talking about this period. And like I've already stated, they actually, I think, made a profit in the transfer market. So it's not like the funds are all being siphoned onto the pitch and into the playing squad. So, I mean, for me, these arguments just don't stack up.
I mean, we'll come on to it a little bit. Like I say, you can't go into too much detail, but you could have a situation in the City case where if they are found guilty of the maximum 115 breaches, you could literally have their whole decade of success completely wiped out. I mean, from our point of view, I don't know what the Premier League stance would be on that, but it could be an absolute nightmare from the Premier League's point of view if the most successful team over the past 10 years in the Premier League, Manchester City, is found to have breached all these rules and regulations. It would just be an absolute, it would be terrible for the Premier League's point of view that this would be the case.
Yeah, and I think that's another thing with Evertonians, why they're hurting, because it almost seems like it's all too easy, it's all too straightforward to dish out this huge penalty to Everton, whereas City's just such a can of worms, just sets such a dangerous. If they're to do anything to them, because like if we're talking proportionally, who knows? I mean, what you're doing, you're saying like City go all the way down to the bottom and start again. I don't know. Do all other clubs, including Liverpool, who've ran them close a few times? Did they get retrospective titles? Maybe they're going to get that parade that they didn't get during COVID to go around with but I don't know. Yeah, it's so. I mean, I'm making light of what is actually a very serious issue there, but Yeah, it's huge, isn't it? So that's another thing that this does. If everything's proportional, if Everton are getting 10 points for this, for not even going into administration, for, like I said, a technicality within what is like an arbitrary measure, as it were, in terms of profit and sustainability, that somebody, it's not like they're going out of business. It's some benchmark that somebody has set, and okay, Everton have been found guilty of breaking that. But to give them a 10-point deduction on the pitch, like I said, it just doesn't seem proportional in terms of what has happened and in terms of who is being punished. And we're not just saying that from an Evertonian point of view. I'm sure if anybody, you take your Everton hat off, and if you just look at what's gone before, it isn't proportional in any way. And like you say, it just brings the potential for so much carnage, as it were. I mean, with City, and it could go on and on, rumble on for years, because there'd be counterclaims, and I guess they'd appeal, and then there'd be all kinds going on. I mean, it just doesn't bear thinking about.
There's plenty of comments coming in, Chris, and I'll read the questions out later in the pod. But there's a couple of people. I'll just read them out to you. So, Mike Donnan, move on, it's done. There's a couple of people suggesting that. Lisa Billington saying, yeah, move on, it's done. That comment, oh yeah, it is. Listen, it's done now, and move on. But can Everton just move on? The club have come out, obviously, since the ruling, and robustly defended their position. So, is there no turning back from Everton now? They literally got to go all in, and we obviously know they're going to do the appeal process. We don't really know a timeline on that yet, but there's no turning back now. We've literally got to go all in.
Yeah, you can only look forward. That's another thing that I said in my piece. I mean, we just got to be positive, like for those reasons I've outlined before, because this could have been a death sentence for Everton in other seasons, even like if it just happened last season. I think that would have been it. Obviously, it was, they ended up staying up by 1 goal after what was so I've had a bit of a discussion with fans over this, but I do this to call them out, because it was disgusting. It was the lowest equivalent points total in the club's history. They were awful last season on the pitch, but now there's under Sean Dyche, they seem to have turned the corner, positive results. So I think only goal difference keeping them off third on the away table this season, and certainly Goodison Park's going to be galvanised. The home form needs to improve, but like I said, the grand old lady, but hell hath no fury like a woman scorned, and what a great atmosphere it's going to be against Manchester United and all subsequent matches now, as the Evertonians all pull together and do all that they can in terms of getting results on the pitch. I said that I just got to be thankful that this is a season where you think they can survive a ruling like this. I mean, what will be. Maybe they'll get some points given back at some point. I don't know. I wouldn't hold my breath personally. I really don't know. You just got to make sure that on the pitch it doesn't become an issue. So even if they don't win an appeal and it stays at 10 points, just make sure it doesn't matter. I mean, you've seen Neville Southall on Twitter today saying how he'd be so motivated to be an Everton player right now. He'd love it. The Premier League have done what nobody else could do in recent years, and they've actually brought the club's administrators, in terms of the backroom staff, the hierarchy at Goodison Park, and this fan base together now, because everyone's pulling in the same direction, and sort of this us against the world mentality. And he said, I think something on the lines of, every point we get is stick it where the sun don't shine to them. So it's sort of fostered that spirit amongst the Blues, and like I said, the hope's got to be that you just make it right on the pitch. So regardless of whether you get any points back or not, it makes no difference, because Everton stay up anyway.
I mean, you just on that point, then, that the siege mentality that you've kind of touched upon. In all my years of supporting Everton, and even before my time of Everton's success in the 80s, the siege mentality, dogs of war, those type of situations, that's when Everton have really come to the fore, isn't it? And that's where they've been most successful. And it seems that certainly over the past couple of years, there has been a lot of divide within the club, and for whatever reason, people with different opinions. You know, people are entitled to their opinions, but right now, unity is the most important thing at this football club, regardless of whatever happens with the appeal, because we have been thrust right back into, you know, a relegation battle now. Unfortunately, obviously our form doesn't represent that, but unfortunately now the league table does.
Yeah, like I said, just got to hope the fact that they are actually technically only one win away from potentially going out of that bottom three, but definitely in terms of, like you say, the unity, the siege mentality, it was always supported that, you know, the most successful Everton sides, the mid-80s and the Howard Kendall, you know, obviously Goodison Park's greatest ever night, Bayern Munich. Obviously the rough treatment given out to Bayern Munich's players, you know, the infamous line about the manager complaining, Mr. Kendall, this is not football, and getting short shrift from the Blues bench there. They've always had that steel as well as the silk in terms of, you know, obviously the school of science and that playing good football. All the best Everton teams been able to mix it as well. As you mentioned, the Dogs at War, which I think Everton should try and harness that spirit again. Obviously, 94, 95, when they were in a similar points position. And now after the deduction, when Joe Royle came in, you know, he kept them up, won the cup as well, because that's another thing, keeping Everton going at the moment. In terms of the cup, they've had a good run. Sean Dyche has treated the Carabao Cup with the respect it deserves, really. Everton don't have the strength and depth to start shuffling the pack like Frank Lampard did last season. He sort of got hoisted by his own petard in that respect and signed his own death warrant in terms of making 11 changes at Bournemouth. That was the start of the demise. He couldn't get out of that. I mean, Everton are now a winnable home tie away from getting into the semi-finals, where you've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting lower division opposition, and all of a sudden you're on the way to Wembley. So, not getting ahead of myself here, but, you know, there's a lot actually to be positive about for once now at Everton, and if we take away that points deduction, and even that you can hope can be overcome, given that this is an improving team. This is a team who, like I said, was on the cusp of mid-table, won 3 games in London consecutively in the league for what's only the second time in the club's entire history. I mean, there's promise there after years of decline and the managerial churn. I think Sean Dyche personally is the best man for the job in these circumstances. I know he's been a divisive figure by his own admission, call himself a Marmite manager, and he divides opinion. But he seems to have turned the corner now, and the players are buying into his methods. You're seeing the results on the pitch. And it's not just the down to 4 points, but this is still a team which is way above that position. So, like I said, with 26 games still left to go in the Premier League, you've got to hope that Everton will be all right. I mean, it shouldn't be the case. I mean, I still think that the punishment doesn't fit the crime, but let's just make sure it doesn't play a part, and that, you know, Everton stay up regardless of what happens in terms of all this.
I mean, the punishment itself is obviously, it's been the biggest news story over the past 2 days, and I'm sure it's set to continue to rumble on. But, you know, you've got sports pundits, former players, like the former Everton player Gary Lineker, Sky Sports pundit Jamie Carragher, former Liverpool player, coming out and just blasting the Premier League to an extent over this punishment. It's not just hit home with Evertonians. This is a, you know, a national thing, really.
Yeah. I mean, well, people might obviously Lineker had the season at Everton, and for as much as he's a fervent Copite now, Jamie Carragher, of course, was a boyhood blue. But yeah, I mean, it's good that the general football fraternity, you got important and influential people like that speaking out. Because I mean, if it was just Evertonians, we may say, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? But yeah, I think it just goes to show, doesn't it? I think the genuine shock about the size of this punishment, and like we discussed already, the potential repercussions for other teams. I mean, we're just concerned about Everton first and foremost, and the sense of injustice it seems to have brought to them in terms of just how severe this penalty is. Just hope that let the football do the talking and then get out of it themselves. But yeah, I think it is important that you get in people within that wider football fraternity speaking out, because it does sort of reassure you that this is not sort of proportional to what's gone on to be hit as hard as this.
Like I said, then a lot of people are kind of coming to terms with it. Some people saying just move on. Obviously, other people saying, you know, we obviously should appeal. You're obviously probably not going to be able to answer this, but the appeal process, we know Everton are going to go through the appeal process. Do we know a timeline? You know, the actual initial process has taken such a long time. How long are we looking here? Because are we looking at before the season, the end of the season? You know, there could be so many. You know, it could be a can of worms. This really, couldn't it? If this goes on and on.
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, my understanding is that it will be done before the end of the season. I don't know in terms of timeline. I'm not going to say like it'll be a month or 2 months or whatever. But my understanding of the situation is that they believe that the appeals process would be completed before the end of the season. So at least you know where you stand then before this season ends, because then it gets all kinds of messes, doesn't it? I mean, I don't know where you go if it doesn't get sorted that way. But yeah, at least that is my understanding. That's the one assurance. You know, it's not a personal assurance, but my understanding is that the appeals process would be completed before the end of the current season. So at least you'd know either way where Everton and everybody else stood.
I'm just going to quickly run through some comments then, Chris. Get them up on the screen. So Steve Mason has said 5-point deduction would be easier to swallow, having admitted to faulting. Obviously, we know Everton aren't, denying that they've unintentionally maybe done something wrong and have admitted to the guilt. It's obviously the punishment that clearly doesn't fit the crime. What would you say to that? 5 points.
I think that there's actually a lot of merit in what Steve says there, because if you look at a historical precedent, the previous time that you had anything close to this, I think, was Sheffield Wednesday also fallen foul of profit and sustainability rules. I think it was season 2020-21. They got a 12-point deduction, and that was later reduced to a 6-point reduction after an appeal. So that would actually sort of follow that pattern, and that they got it halved. I mean, ultimately, didn't say Sheffield Wednesday, they still got relegated. But yeah, theirs went down from 12 to 6. So, I mean, it's a fair assumption that perhaps, it might be able to get one go from 10 to 5.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a question in from Steve Mason. This is an interesting one, Chris. And again, you're not going to be able to give a definitive answer on it. But Martin Edwards has said, or asked, will the club prevent the banners going in next week? There's been a lot of talk on social media of protests, banners going up, against the Premier League. Probably a difficult one for Everton, but are we expected to see banners, protesting against this decision on the Premier League?
We're certainly expected to see the banners, and I don't know why the club would. I mean, it's in the club's interest, isn't it? I don't think they would stop. I mean, the only thing you can say is, I don't know, you potentially upset the Premier League even more by doing stuff like that. But I've not heard anything about the club actually stopping them. I mean, obviously, when the fans were protesting against their own ownership last season, we saw banners within the ground. I mean, I think we even saw one this season about people speaking out about 777 when we were at the Brentford game. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of. I've not heard any policy of where the club was going to stop them bringing them in. And while I'm sure the club are never going to go on the record and say they're positively encouraging such a thing. It's all in terms of them pulling in the same direction. In that I know that privately they're absolutely livid about this. They think they're struggling to come to terms with it themselves. They just don't think it's a proportional punishment, and in fact, they go as far as saying that they don't think there should be a sporting sanction whatsoever.
Anthony Osman has said, we're being discriminated against to such a level that we should sue the Premier League, as it's not a sports issue for this deduction. We've obviously touched upon that. No benefit or Everton having benefited in any sporting arena from this, financial penalty. Again, this is opening up a can of worms, isn't it? But could Everton, if the appeal process doesn't go in our favour, there's appeal processes and more appeal processes that could go on further. But obviously, within the timeline, Everton could be relegated by then. But then they could be safe by then.
Yeah, I mean, totally understand Anthony's frustration and share it. But I must admit, from a legal point of view, I'm nowhere near as much an expert as even suggest how that would start. I really don't know. I wouldn't know where to start with that one. That's the problem. I mean, I'm supposed to be a football reporter. I mean, it seems to be doing increasingly amount of stuff that's non-football there. But yeah, I honestly wouldn't know where to start with that one. I'm not too sure how it would work from a practical point of view.
Okay, thanks for the questions that have just been sent in there. So I want to talk about football and matters really. It's the international break. Do you think has this come at a good time, the international break, or would you rather see an Everton match this weekend? Given what's going on, we know Everton play United next week, 4 o'clock or 3:30 on Sunday. Do you foresee a change in atmosphere, a change in attitude at Goodison Park now?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's an interesting one to debate whether would it have been better going straight into it this weekend, when the feelings are still raw, maybe just 48 hours after the decision, or if you've had time to digest it, sort of come to terms with it over a week or so. I really don't know. I think it makes no odds. I mean, you could have had a 6-week break like the World Cup last year, but Goodison was still going to be rocking the next time Everton went there after a decision like this. I'm not too sure. I think whenever the Everton's next home game was going to be, it was going to be a huge atmosphere. And just the hope is obviously they can keep it up, not just the Manchester United game, which is still going to be a tough game. We know all the problems they've got, and you might think it's actually a good time to play United, but you've got to continue this throughout the season now. It's not just going to be a one-off thing. It's just got to be sort of the fuel to fire Everton, both home and away, for the rest of the season now. This sense of injustice, not just the one game. Obviously, that's going to be when the eyes of the world are on Everton, and probably the biggest spotlight in terms of a protest and what sort of reaction you're going to get. We just have to keep this going for not just the weeks ahead, that busy December period, but for the whole rest of the season.
I do want to touch upon other clubs, particularly Manchester City, who find themselves in a similar situation. We know City are being investigated for 115 breaches themselves. We've kind of touched upon it a little bit, but Everton's 10-point deduction for one breach, so insignificant. Obviously, the Premier League don't see that, but surely, if City are found guilty on even half of those 115, like what precedent does it set? I think someone obviously did the maths, and City were deducted over 1,000 points if this was to be go into fruition. Do you know what I mean? So it's in a way the Premier League are backing themselves into a deeper corner by I know it's clear that they're trying to set an example on Everton to stop other Premier League teams doing it, but surely they're setting the precedent.
Yeah, it just doesn't bear thinking about with City, because with the repercussions. I mean, they're not going to get 1,000-point fine, are they? That's just not going to be applicable in any way. I mean, obviously, like you say, somebody's done the maths and worked it out, but I really don't know. It's massive, isn't it? It's potentially huge because, like you say, not just in terms of what happens to City. If you relegate City you relegate them almost, who knows? But also what goes on in terms of, unlike Everton, this is one season, and you've got the other clubs who are involved in that. They're already, some of those have been kicking off and causing ructions. What do you do over something that happened over a decade? It just doesn't. It doesn't bear think about in terms of the scale of the whole thing. You just don't know where then, like we've already touched upon already, retrospective titles being handed out, but it's just not that. It's like Champions League places, all kinds of where do you stop? Even like just normal league results against like Everton and all other clubs. It's just a massive rod for their own back in terms of the Premier League. Okay, like you said, they've been wanting to be seen to be tough to Everton and not letting them get off lightly, but I just don't know. But I mean, there's so much sort of leeway it could go either way. Like you said, there were 115 charges. You could have half of them. You could have a quarter of them, 3/4, none of them, all of them. It's just where would it all end? I mean, I don't know. Our priority has got to be Everton, and what this means for Everton. But it beggars belief what could happen with City and other clubs if those ever do get investigated.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a couple of people in the comments, Chris, asking, do you honestly think that we will get a point reduction or get points back, whatever way you want to look at it, on appeal? Do you foresee that, or do you think the Premier League are going to stand firm on that?
Given that they initially said they recommended 12 themselves, like I said, that I wouldn't be holding my breath. I wouldn't be holding out for that possibility. We discussed already. Sheffield Wednesday went to appeal, got theirs halved. But I wouldn't be relying on that. I mean, it'd be a nice bonus to get those back. But as I've said already, let's just make sure that Everton are safe regardless of this. And I genuinely believe there's a good chance of that compared to recent years. So first and foremost, pull away from the danger anyway. And then anything else you can get is like an added bonus, because then you get a bit more money, wouldn't you, in prize money and finishing a bit higher up the Premier League table. But yeah, I wouldn't be sort of holding out on that, and hopefully it doesn't come to that. Let's just hope that Everton are good enough on the pitch for that just to be a bonus in terms of them remaining in the Premier League.
Yeah. Going to finish off now, Chris. I think I've kept you for long enough. But just one last question before I do. I asked Joe Thomas this yesterday.
Yeah.
If this 10-point deduction is to stick, which, it's looking likely that it is. We don't know what the appeal process will bring. Everton are currently 19th, 4 points. Will Everton stay up and be in the Premier League next year?
Yeah, I've said already. I genuinely believe they do. I think that's the one good thing that we could say about it coming now, in that, like I said, they're only 2 points adrift to safety as overhauled in Luton Town, 1 point behind Sheffield United. Over a 26-game period, you've got to back them. I mean, they had 45 minutes against Luton Town to come back. They should have come back then, and they didn't do. But over 26 games, you've got to, and that's got to be the whole saving grace in this. That you've got to believe, this is an improving Everton team. They're going to be galvanised more by the sense of defiance from all this. And personally, I'm very much backing them, and I'm hoping that they'll stay up. I genuinely believe they do. I mean, it shouldn't have come to this, but yeah, I believe that they will stay up.
Right. Well, Chris, thanks for obviously joining me for this latest chat. Any plans for the rest of the afternoon, or are you just going to be monitoring closely the latest developments from this 10-point deduction story?
We've got a nice piece coming up about Neville Southall and the statue again, because we've got a piece coming up on Nev's comments today online. But before that, earlier in the week, he was talking about playing down that idea that he should have a statue, and that he's got enough sort of adulation during his playing career. But I mean, there's a lot of Evertonians, including myself, actually respectfully disagree with that for Nev, and we believe that should get that for the new stadium. But it might have to have a whip round, given that the Premier League are concerned about Everton's spending. So perhaps the fans might have to fund that one themselves.
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it, to be honest. Yeah. So, guys, okay, thanks very much to our listeners and to the people watching. There'll be plenty more to come on this story, obviously, over the course of the weekend and into next week. Obviously, follow on from that, Everton have got a massive game at Goodison Park, 4:30 p.m, under the lights against Manchester United. That's going to be an interesting one. Stick with the Echo's website and social channels for all the latest news and developments.